All right. Hey there, everybody. Patrick Kremer. I'm a staff solution architect selling VMware Cloud on AWS. I work for VMware, and we are here talking about APIs. So I came up the traditional system administrator track in my career. So code is not really something that I know inherently. And I've been on a little bit of a personal growth kick over the last year and a half to modernize my skills and to understand code. And some of the product of that is what you see here. So there's a URL that we're going to share up in the chat. Everything that we're doing here today is code that we have built and created, and it's stuff that you can run at home. We're going to be doing a bunch of stuff against just a regular vCenter. So if you have any vCenter available to you, you'll be able to do all these samples. This lesson here in this repo is actually we developed it internally, myself and Nico Wiebert, one of our field principals, and we gave it internally for some VMware folks, and we had VDIs and all of the tools were installed and stuff. So to be able to do some of this stuff, you will have to install a few tools later on to be able to do it. So I do have links here to everything that you would need: installing Python, installing Terraform, PowerShell, PowerCLI. It's really not that involved. So I mean, if you've done any sort of system administration at all, you're going to be able to get through the installs. They're pretty straightforward. The documentation's pretty clear on how to sort of get your laptop ready to be able to do this stuff. And then we're just going to jump sort of right into lessons. I don't have any slides. We're just going straight to lessons. So let me get this going here. Okay, so we're going to talk about APIs. There's a bunch of different ways to call APIs. If you have ever used PowerCLI, you've used an API. You may not know that you're using an API, but you are. So PowerCLI is one of the most common tools that a system administrator uses to automate tasks against a VMware environment. And you're actually calling APIs on the back end. You're running, regular commands, but you're calling APIs on the back end. So we're going to do a little demonstration of very basics of PowerCLI. And actually, I'm going to show you our virtual center first. So everything that I'm doing today is against a VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. So if you've never seen VMC, this is what it looks like. This is the little SDDC that I spun up for this. And we're going to open our virtual center. And this will look like any vCenter that you've valid credentials. Copy password. Oh, all right. What doesn't it like? Let's see. I'm gonna pull this off real quick. Can't even log into vCenter, so stand by. All right, there we go. Apparently, I don't know, can't use a clipboard, so that's what you get when you live demo, I guess. Cool. All right, here is my VMC on AWS vCenter. You can see we have a 2-node cluster. It's empty. There's nothing in here. There's all of the default folders, but this is what we're going to be coding against. So we're going to show VMC first. We're going to show Power CLI first. So we'll jump back to here and we're going to connect. So this is a command that you use to connect to your virtual center. And I'm also in the wrong terminal. So let's do it in PowerShell. So we're gonna do this in PowerShell. This tool is called Visual Studio Code. There's instructions also on how to install this. It's an easy download, and it's just a way to be able to see code and a terminal together. And there's all kinds of add-ons that we won't really get into, but it lets you run your code and run terminal commands. And it's just another sort of developer's tool. So we've made a connection to our virtual center, and we've successfully logged in. And I've just got a list of commands here that that you can use. So it's sort of plain English, right? How do I get a VM list? Well, I do get-vm. How do I get a set of hosts? Get VM host. How do I list the folders? Right? I'm doing tabbing here to complete. But I can do get folder. So all of the folders that are in the vCenter show up. You don't have to know anything about the API. You just have to know some of the get commands. And that's really it. You can also do create commands. There's new commands, new dash to create things. If you want to see everything that you can do, you can actually do this get command. I think I might make this a little bit larger. Might be a little bit better. Might be able to see a little bit better. Get command. And if you do this get command minus module VMware, look at all this stuff. There's all of these commands that VMware has authored for you, and they are essentially wrappers around the API so that you can easily create and interact with your vCenter. So this command, workloads folder, basically what I'm saying is in code, I want you to give me this workloads folder. That's all that says right here. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get folder workloads. I've gotten that. There's my workloads folder, and it contains VMs. And then I want to make a new folder, and I'm naming it Kremer PowerShell workloads folder. The command succeeds. And if we switch back to our vCenter, there it is. So very simple command. All we did is make a folder, but PowerShell makes it super easy, and PowerCLI makes it super easy to be able to do. And again, you have called, on the back end, you've called an API. You don't know it, but you have. So that's just one way. Again, very simple example, but you're calling an API that way. And we also have Terraform. So here's this Terraform example. And so the same way that we logged in with PowerShell Power CLI, we passed it a URL, we passed it a username, we passed it a password. Terraform is another way to interact with a virtual infrastructure. Power CLI is good for interacting with brownfield environments. Terraform is really infrastructure as code. So to define everything that you want in your infrastructure and then tell it to go out and build it. So instead of programming commands, you are telling it, for instance, I want you to create a folder called pkramer Terraform, pkramer TF underneath workloads. So it's a different way to write some code, and you're still calling APIs on the back end. You're just doing it in a different way. So all of these technologies are really just wrappers to make interacting with the underlying API easier. That's really all it is. So to interact a little bit with Terraform, we're going to switch to the Terraform directory. And there's really only 3 commands that you need to do to run Terraform. There's a Terraform init. And I had never messed with Terraform at all before we started looking at these lessons. Actually, it was brand new to me, and it's not that hard to pick up. So Terraform init out of the gate, and you just have to do this once the first time. You can actually see it downloaded vSphere because it knows that I am using the vSphere provider. So it went out and automatically downloaded the vSphere provider so that Terraform knows how to talk to vCenter. And then I'm going to do a Terraform plan. And this is actually going to look at what I've defined here, and it's going to tell me, hey, I'm going to create this folder, and this is what it's going to be called. And if you do an apply, we're gonna add one folder. And then I can do a Terraform apply. It'll take a second, figure out what it's going to do, and then once this completes, it's going to warn us. It says again, "Hey, I'm going to add this folder. Do you really want me to?" I type yes, and it does it. Now, if we switch back to our vCenter, we should see my Terraform folder. So again, very simple examples. We have interacted with the API in two different ways. We have made it in Power CLI, and we have done it in Terraform. So two different ways. And now I'm actually going to show you what it really looks like underneath the covers. So there's a command called curl, and this is actually showing you sort of exactly what's happening under the cover. So curl is a utility that you can use to directly call a raw API. In the lesson, you can kind of read about exactly what an API is. And if you know databases, you've got like your CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete. And APIs have the same idea, sort of the same set of operations. They're just called something differently. So a put is a create operation, a get is a read operation, a patch is an update operation, and delete is delete. So it's the same set of operations. And the REST APIs are, you're using APIs actually all day long. You're doing a GET request just like you would do with an API call. It's all sort of the same thing running on HTTP on the internet. So it's not this sort of impossible, scary thing to learn as a sysadmin. You absolutely can learn it. It's not terribly complex. You can do it. So I'm going to show you GitHub, not GitHub. I'm going to show you curl. All right, so in this bash directory, all of this stuff is going on in the background. You didn't know it when you were calling it in either Terraform. You didn't know it when you were calling it in PowerShell, but all of this stuff is happening in the background. So if you look at this command, this curl command, there's a couple switches. -K means insecure. So we're telling the curl utility, I want you to open up this URL, and I don't care if the security certificate is invalid. So if you have an internal vCenter that you're hitting with curl, you're going to have to do this -I, this -K rather. The -I is just going to give us some details, some HTTP headers that'll give us some output. And the -U is specifying a username and password. It's the same username and password that we passed into Terraform, same username and password that we passed into Power CLI, same stuff. And this is our vCenter URL. It's the same URL, but you have to know the API paths. So if you're calling a raw API, you have to know the path. So the first thing that's going to happen here is it's going to show us the headers. So this is the actual conversation that's going on behind the scenes. This is the raw HTTP that's happening on the back end, and it's setting a cookie. So if you've ever wondered what a cookie actually looks like, this is it. And what's happening here is you are exchanging your username and password for a session token, and it sets a cookie in your browser. And that's how you're able to interact with a vCenter without passing your username and password constantly. So here's our little cookie. And this -C token right here, it's dropping our cookie into a little text file. So that's what the cookie looks like. And then this, oops, I just closed it. And then this second command right here, curl, the same -K for insecure. But here, -B, we're telling it, I want you to take the cookie, and I want you to use the cookie to authenticate, and I want to list out the folders. So if I run this with curl, that's the raw API output. It's in a format called JSON, but this is the same. We do a get folder, right? It's all the same stuff. Here's P Kremer TF, here's P Kremer PS, and we have the same raw output in JSON. There's P Kremer TF. So the folders are all there, but this is obviously an easier way to interact with it. But this is actually what's happening under the covers. It's all this, all JSON, all HTTP requests and JSON. I'm gonna see if, all right, let's see. Zoom in a little bit was the suggestion. So I will zoom in a little more, or I will not do it. Let's see. All right, a little bit bigger. This should be good. All right, cool. All right, so next we're going to get into a little bit into VMC. So I'm going to jump over here and show you a little bit about the VMC API and kind of how this works. So in our, I'm going to show you a couple things. So VMC allows me to have multiple identities. So these are all of the organizations that I belong to. So you can have different permissions in different orgs. So that's one part of it. And APIs work on tokens. So I'm going to show you these tokens here. And this is a way to not pass usernames and passwords. API tokens work like this. So I can give different permissions to different tokens. I can use these tokens in different areas of code. So there's two tokens that I created. I did a read-only token in preparation for this, and I did an administrative token. Now, anybody who has these tokens on the public internet, you can hit the API. So you have to be careful not to let tokens leak. But I'm going to show you what it's like to generate a token. So here in VMC, you can decide what permissions level you want to give a token. You could give it permissions just to VMware Cloud on AWS. You could give it permissions to any of the VMC services that you wanted. And the one that I initially created, I just gave it a read-only role, right? And you hit generate, and then it's going to give you a string. And that is what you end up using in your code. So this here, that right there is a refresh token. That is a read-only refresh token. So if you're watching and you steal this token, you're just going to get a read-only view. So it's not that big of a security hole. But this is actually how you interact with the API. This is how you actually interact with all APIs. Actually have a token like this, public APIs. So another thing to highlight is in the Developer Center in VMC. So we're going to jump into VMware Cloud on AWS now. Or it'll hang and we won't go anywhere. All right, cool. So there is a Developer Center here. So when you're trying to figure out what API call you even want to make, you can go into the API Explorer. If you don't know what you're doing in here, you can easily get lost. It's easy to wander through, but you open this up, you pick your SDDC, and here's all the APIs that are available to you, but you don't necessarily know what to look for, right? Like here's all these words and you don't know, and you recognize orgs. I just told you what an org was, an organization. So here's a get. So we talked about get is a read command. So if I were to execute this, it does actually list out my org. So you have some idea of what you're doing in here, but you don't necessarily know. If you don't know the API, you're not really sure where to start. Now, here on this tab, there's a bunch of code samples. And that's kind of what I like to do. Find somebody who's written code before and see how they did it. And you can just do it that way. So there's one of these that I found from Alan that I downloaded. Let's see, what did I call it? Can't remember what it was called, but I did download it into the repo, and he did an example, a curl function, um, for how to authenticate. So if you actually look at the code that he wrote, what is he doing? The first thing that he's doing is he is passing a username and password. He's not passing it, he's passing the token. He's passing a token to this URL, AM API auth API tokens. So that's how you know how to authorize against the API. You could try to find it in the API documentation, or you can find somebody's code that has done it for you. So let's see how we actually run this curl command. Now this will run directly on a Linux machine. You can run into problems if you're like me and you're on Windows, because Windows does not directly run bash scripts. So there's a couple ways you can actually run a bash script directly on Windows. One of the cool things about installing Git is you have an option to install Git bash, and you can actually run commands. You can run bash commands directly out of Git bash. So if I were to do this VMC authenticate curl command, it actually works. If you are a fan of the Windows subsystem for Linux, you can also you can run the command here in WSL. But little thing to warn you about. So whereas git bash will translate end of line characters between platforms, Windows subsystem for Linux will not. So if I run this bash script in WSL, it tells me it's a bad interpreter. And Visual Studio Code actually does a really cool little thing. You see the CRLF down here? You can actually flip to a Unix style set of end of line characters. So if I switch that to an LF, then I go to rerun it, it works. So you can switch back and forth with just simple LF and CRLF. So it's a really good way to be able to run Linux stuff on Windows. Now, looking at what actually came out, now this is a mess, right? This is a a big mess of code that's sort of difficult to read. It's not very human readable. I mean, it's English words, but it's kind of a mess. So, what actually happened here is we sent our our refresh token, and it gave us an access token. This is essentially the same thing as the cookie, right? That's how we're going to authenticate. And then it dumped a list of all of the organizations that I'm a part of. So again, this is all the stuff that's going on in the back end. Just when you're browsing a website, all this data is traversing behind the scenes. And so once you know what the URLs are to authenticate against, you can use them in a different language like Python. So we're going to do some Python examples, both vCenter and VMC. So let's do this Python example. Let me do this. Let's see. We've got so vCenter REST in Python. Let's start there. Switch back to this little terminal here. Okay. We're going to go line by line in this code. This is Python. It's a good language to pick up. There's tons of examples for interacting with APIs. And Joe Hughes says Patrick's giving away tokens like we're at Chuck E. Cheese. I like that comment. Oh man, and yes, you can do masked there's a bunch of stuff that you can do to sort of hide this. Again, they're read-only tokens, so I'm not too concerned about theft. I'll also deactivate them. So these are all read-only for now. And then well, we're not using the token here because vCenter, we're still doing username and password. and this is firewalled, so you guys can't hit this. So I'm looking at you, Joe. You can't mess up my vCenter, buddy. If we switch to the Python directory, I'm actually going to take you line by line through what is in here. Now, this code is super verbose. You wouldn't put all this debugging in for a normal function, for a normal set of code that you're going to do, but I have it very heavily commented and literally explaining every single line. So if you go back and you want to try to learn what was going on, you'll be able to see it. So I'm gonna run this real quick. Joe says, "Try me." In a minute, I'm gonna see Joe somehow breaking through the firewall and taking my vCenter down. Okay. So a lot happened when we ran this. So we're going to go line by line. We're going to look at the output, and we're going to show you exactly what it takes to call a REST API in Python. So we've defined the same username and password in vCenter that we did in the other examples. This is the same stuff that you're passing into Power CLI. This is the same stuff that you're passing into curl. This is the same stuff that you're passing into Terraform. It's all the same. In order to send APIs through Python, you do this. This is essentially, this looks like JSON. This is the same as the JSON that's being sent back and forth. This is a type of variable in Python called a dictionary. You don't have to know that in order to be able to use it. But Python's cool because the dictionary type is basically identical to writing in JSON. This is JSON. It looks like JSON. So you're basically telling the API, hey, I'm sending you JSON and I want you to send me JSON back. This URL here, we're going to build a URL, and it's going to be our vCenter, and we're going to add rest.com VMware sys session onto it. Now, if you look at curl, it's the exact same thing. Rest.com VMware sys session, exact same stuff. So it's the same URL. And I'm able to take this example that was written for me in curl, and I'm able to use it in Python. And so we have this debug output in here, and it's telling us, okay, here's the URL that I'm going to use. Let's see, let's find. All right. So this is what it's calling to exchange the token. And this does a post. So this is essentially doing the same thing as the curl command, but we're sending it the header. So we're sending it this content type application JSON. We're sending it the username and password, and we're doing verify equals false. This is the same thing as doing -k in curl. You're just telling it, I want you to do this instant. Now, we don't have to do false because the VMC vCenter has a public search. So if we switch this to true, it would work. Probably won't work when you're messing around at home in your home lab or potentially even your production systems. Not everybody replaces their certs. So we've done a post to the URL, to this URL, and it is returning us a token in JSON. So I'm actually dumping the JSON out on the display. So this is actually what comes out. This is what the vCenter is returning to us, and it's telling us, hey, here's the session ID. Now that should look familiar because it looks exactly like the cookie. This is the same thing that curl did for us. It's passing us a cookie. And that's our session ID. And that's what we're going to use to authenticate with the rest of, not VMC, vCenter. Go back to this file. So we're extracting that session token out of the JSON, and it's super easy. So session JSON value. So if you look at what it returned, this is the JSON that it returned. It's literally just value and then the string. So that's how you do it in Python. The name of the variable and literally value in quotes. And now we can use that to build a second call. So we're actually going to build a second call, and we're actually going to list folders. So it's the same get folder command. It's the same API that gets called when you look at folders up in vCenter. So it's all the same stuff. But in this case, we're doing a session token. And then I'm showing the header here. So this is what the header actually looked like with the token inserted. And then the folder URL, it's the same URL that we had in curl, rest vCenter folder. So this is what we're calling with the token. And this is the raw JSON, right? So all the folders just in raw format, which is not all that easy to digest. But here's our Terraform folder, PowerShell folder that we created is in there. So it's all there. And you can do formatting, you can do different stuff. But down at the bottom here, I'm just giving examples of an easy way in Python to loop through it. So we've got all of our JSON in this variable. And let me show you this here. So the JSON comes back with this property here, value. So we have to reference that value. So we're actually trying to rotate through all of the folders that are in this value. So that's why we do value here. And then we're just doing a print command. And there's folder names, and there's also folder types, because you can have data center folders or VM folders or a bunch of different folders. So basically we're telling it to cycle through the JSON that you got back and print out the folder and the type of folder. So that's all that happens in this little block of code. And then this little block of code just does a little extra check. I just want to print out virtual machine folders. That's it. So we're just checking folder type. That's it. Just simple little code, a string comparison. And I only want to print out VM folders, right? So this output, it printed them all. And this output, I filtered out. Anything except for virtual machine folders. So it's more work to be able to call the API through Python, but then you also get all of the raw objects to work with, and you can do whatever you need to do in the rest of the language, right? So that is it for REST. So now we're going to do a little. That's it for vCenter. So now we're going to do a little bit in VMC. All right, so we've got this token here. We've got this token. Clear the screen. We're going to see what this one does. What happens when I run it? VMC REST. And let's see. What happened? Okay, so at the end of this bit of code, what I wanted to do is I wanted to print out all the organizations. So it's a programmatic way to call what we've already called. So it's the same idea. The same sort of it's all the same stuff, right? We're using all of the same paths. We're doing the same authorization, and we are again at the bottom of this just printing out the orgs. So it's just listing out the orgs instead of listing out folders. So you just need to find the path for what you're looking for and alter the code. So we're going to try this different one. So we're going to list segments. So let's show you VMC segments. All right, here's my SDDC. How am I on time? I got about 10 minutes, I think. All right, SDDC. Networking and security. So in VMware Cloud and AWS, you can create network segments just right here on the fly. Here's my default one, 192.168.1.1/24. I'm going to add another one, Kremer segment. It's going to be routed 192.168.10.1/24. So there, I've added another one. There's my little segment, and we want to be able to interact with it programmatically. Maybe you want to write a script to add segments. Maybe you need to read the segments. There's all kinds of different things that you can do when you interact with an API, but maybe you have no idea what that API is. It's kind of maybe hard to find in the documentation. So I'm going to show you this trick. It's like one of my favorite tricks. Every browser has this. This is Chrome. It has it. Firefox also has developer data, but we've got developer tools here. So under more tools, developer tools, you've got a bunch of different options here, but this under network. So under the network area of this, you can filter for VMwareVMC.com. And if you click around on the website in VMC, the API calls that are being made actually show up, and you can inspect them. If we go to add a segment, another one, I'm going to do 192.168.224.1/24, and we hit save, what will happen is nothing will show, and I'm not entirely sure why. Well, I'm not entirely sure why that is not working. Again, probably because I'm live. Huh. All right, well, maybe we just won't show that, and I will post some examples afterwards so you can see what we're doing. All right, so I'm gonna live show my my blog instead. All right, so what's supposed to happen, and I'm not entirely sure why it isn't doing it. It actually shows you the API that is being called. So if I zoom in here, you can actually watch the entire API live. What's really happening when you're browsing in VMC, it's calling the API. You can actually see the full URL that is being called. You can see the entire payload. And in that way, you can actually figure out how it's listing out. Like this particular one is listing out the services. I was clicking into the services in VMC, trying to figure out which service was listed. And now I know the API call. So I can literally just call this API in code with this entire URL, and it's going to give me all a list of the VMC and AWS services. So if you look here, right? So services are a list of either well-known ports or custom ports, HTTPS, HTTP, SMTP, whatever. And yeah, so that was the idea that I was going to show live, but you know, I couldn't. But that's my trick to actually figuring out what the API is that I want to call. You actually just sort of show it. Scotty's asking if the segment actually got initialized. I think it went. Yeah, both of them seem to have succeeded. So anyway, not quite sure why that is. Anyway, that's the main stuff that I was gonna demo. So we got thoughts, questions. It's a lot to take initially, right? It can be sort of confusing, particularly as a sysadmin. Maybe you don't really know Python, and maybe you've never used curl before. But really what I was trying to show is that you're passing all the same information. It's all the same stuff that you're sending: usernames, passwords, tokens, all the same stuff. It's just a different way to interact with the API. That's really it. So I'll look for some more questions and comments. I don't see anything. I don't see anything yet, but did you put the URL in chat, Kripa? If I see it in comments. Oh yeah, VMware. Yep, she did right at the so all the way back at the top. The code repo that you can work off of is all right here. So all the code is here. Everything that we did today is all up. So it's stuff that you can play with and learn and actually do in your own environment. And hit me up on the Twitters if you're confused or need help at Kremer Patrick. Find me on the Twitters and hit me if you got questions.